Welcome everyone. I see the numbers are piling up and folks are coming in. We'll get started very shortly. This is one of our last panels for the CNHED Community Development Week, DC into the Future, and we have some great panelists. So hold tight for a couple of minutes while folks still shuffle in, and then we'll get started shortly. Okay, it looks like the attendees are slowing down a little bit, so we'll go ahead and get started. Again, welcome to our Community Development Week 2021 and our panel, DC into the Future. Just a little bit of virtual housekeeping. This is a webinar, so you will not be able to be seen or be heard, but you can see and hear us. Please excuse any background noise, children or animals that you may hear, as we're all still kind of working from home. This is a panel where we'll be taking questions from the audience, so please use the chat function to put your questions in the chat, and Steve will get to them when we get to the Q&A portion, or if he sees something that's really invigorating, I'm sure he'll just throw it into the conversation. Other than that, this webinar is being recorded, and I'll hand it over to you, Steve.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Before we start our panel conversation, I just want to, for people who are not aware, tell people very quickly what DC Community Development Week is. Every year during the month of October, CNHED hosts with other partners DC Community Development Week. The intention of this week is to really just lift up the good work being done by community development practitioners, partners, our local government, and other stakeholders in the field of community development. This year, I want to do a quick recap. Monday, we had a webinar on the entrepreneurial mindset that was led by the GW School of Business, and it was a really eye-opening conversation about kind of what makes an entrepreneur entrepreneurial. On Tuesday, we released a new lender's guide. This lender's guide is intended to make it less mystical for small businesses to identify lenders and lender products. Already we have had requests for that guide to be shared with other cities around the country. So we think that it is going to have a lot of usefulness. Yesterday we had a workshop on inside procurement with PEPCO, and we had the PEPCO minority supplier team talk to a lot of our businesses. PEPCO has a very intentional and ambitious approach to minority supplier work, and that was well received. Later this month, we will also have an eviction prevention webinar. The city has done an amazing job of getting rental assistance out, but we still know, even with the deployment of all that rental assistance, we still have eviction challenges and issues. And so we're going to be hearing from leaders about that. And tomorrow, we will partner with Congress Heights Senior Wellness Center to recognize seniors who have been making contributions to their community. So that brings me to today's panel. And I want to start off by thanking our panelists for agreeing to participate in this. And I just want to quickly set the framing. But before I do, I want to just take a quick moment to thank this year's Community Development Week sponsors. Every year we get people to sponsor Community Development Week. We are particularly appreciative this year that sponsors continue to support when largely we've had to be virtual. Normally during Community Development Week, we time groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings. We host our annual gala, and sponsors, quite frankly, get more out of those moments than you can in a virtual setting. So I want to thank and start by thanking one of our panelists, Ellis Carr with Capital Impact Partners, for being one of our sponsors, PNC Bank, W.C. Smith and Company, J.B. Smith and Company, the DC Housing Finance Agency, M&T Bank, Klein Hornig, and the DC Housing Authority. I want to thank our sponsors for supporting our efforts to continue to focus on community development during this remote time. So in designing this year's Community Development Week, we reflected on how we've been the last 18 months since the public health crisis began. We as a jurisdiction have done very well by our residents, our families, our communities, our service providers, and our economic infrastructure. To the credit of our government and other leaders, early on, they committed to utilizing the unavoidable disruptions to advance racial equity. Other sectors retooled their thinking, practices, and approaches, and we collectively proved to be caring, resilient, and strategic. But we've also been more urgent and immediate focused than we traditionally are. And in that vein, we thought it would be good to afford ourselves the relief, the luxury of taking a look forward. Some plans have been put on hold. I think you'll hear from the deputy mayor that some plans have not been put on hold and that we are marching forward with some of our pre-pandemic aspirations and pursuits. We couldn't be more delighted to have the leaders that we have with us today to help give us that view. They not only have the perch from where to see into the future, they have the mission and mandate to do so and to focus on it. And with that, I'll get us started and I'll introduce them, ask them if they'd like to make any introductory remarks. We have some questions teed up for them, and we also will provide you an opportunity to ask questions in the chat. Deputy Mayor John Falcicchio serves as the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development. Deputy Mayor Falcicchio also served as the Mayor's Chief of Staff since the start of her administration, after volunteering as a campaign advisor and director and director of Mayor-elect Bowser's transition. John also has a number of other previous political and professional positions, including senior work with the Democratic National Committee. Marla Bilonick, who is and by the way, Deputy Mayor Falcicchio is no stranger to CNHED. He regularly meets with us and engages us offline around some of the administration's both challenges as well as opportunities. Marla Bilonick is also no stranger to CNHED. She serves as NALCAB, which is the National Alliance of Latino Community Asset Builders. She's their president and CEO, and also serves as CEO of NALCAB's subsidiary asset management company, Escalera Community Investments. Prior to joining NALCAB, she served as the executive director of the Latino Economic Development Center, and she also was a former CNHED board member and co-chair of our Economic Development Committee. Ellis Carr, also no stranger to CNHED, has more than 20 years of experience in the financial services and mortgage industries. Mr. Carr has served as Capital Impact Partners president and CEO since 2016. In 2021, he became president and chief executive officer of CDC Small Business Finance. And last and certainly not least, Andrew, who is quickly becoming no stranger to CNHED, is president and CEO of the Consortium of Universities of the Washington metropolitan area. Just prior to joining the consortium, he served as vice president for AAC&U, where he successfully developed a broad range of innovative partnerships with nonprofit organizations, foundations, and private companies to support quality and equity through higher education. Andrew is on our Community Anchor Partnership Advisory Board, but has also been an offline advisor about trends not only affecting higher education, but large institutions and other industries as well. So with that, I'll kick us off. Mr. Deputy Mayor, would you like to get us going and make any opening remarks you'd like to make?
Well, thank you for the introduction. And when you say that we are in touch often, it's because you will make sure that we stay in touch. And I do, actually, though, I say that, but I also do reach out to talk to you, be a sounding board, kind of run some of the fresh ideas that we come up with by you. So I definitely appreciate the partnership. And really, actually, one of the programs that doesn't often get highlighted that I really want to thank you for your leadership on is the Anchor program, making sure that large institutions that operate in the district get connected with local businesses. Really important. And to the rest of the panelists, thank you. Although Ellis, I think you're following me or I'm following you because we were on a virtual panel this morning. So I just wanted to say how excited we are about where we are 19 months ago, nobody knew what we were about to face, but we really stuck together to get ourselves through some of our darkest days. If you think about it, I'm referring specifically to the pandemic, but the conversation much needed conversation that happened in May and June of last year about racial justice, social equality, all of those conversations were very important, but it was not an easy time to leave the city. And then there was one resident or temporary resident who really occupied some of our time. I won't even bring up the name, but you all know who I'm talking about. So the last 19 months have been the most trying, I think, for any mayor, and the mayor stood tall. And what I think has been empowered her to do that is that we've all stuck together. We've had the toughest of times, but we have a lot of great opportunities. We just started our fiscal year on October 1st. What we are implementing now is what Mayor Bowser calls her fair shop budget. We'll talk about items within that budget, I'm sure, today, but really excited about all the possibilities that are happening in that budget. And Ellis and I were talking about one of those opportunities this morning. That was our virtual engagement this morning, but we'll talk about that more today. But really excited about where we're situated in order to really come back strong. And I ask people all the time to think about what DC stands for. It stands for the District of Comebacks, and we're going to have a collective. We're going to have a collective comeback together, but we're really excited to celebrate and support and celebrate those individual comebacks as well.
I appreciate that, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And, I've said this to members of your administration. I'm not sure that I've ever said it in moments where we were present. Representing CNHED, I sit on 3 national boards. During the pandemic, our collective leadership were assessing how our cities were responding to the pandemic. And it gave me a different view of how the mayor and you and your team led us through the pandemic. I can tell you that DC was not only different, but far ahead at different critical points in time than other cities. Other cities were listening to what was happening in the district and taking it back to their leaders because they were not as far. But there's a fundamental point that's worth bringing up, and this is just my personal view and what I observed. Every city leader across this country, when faced with both information, science, and other things, had a values choice to make about whether they were going to put people in life and safety and science over commerce. And the District of Columbia did that. And all of us should be very proud of the mayor and her team for facing that decision and actually making the decision that we made. And I shared that with other members of the administration, but I wanted to share that with you as well.
Well, and I'll just say briefly, because I want to make sure we get some of the other panelists in. They're anxious, I'm sure, to join the conversation. Is that one thing I think we have to keep in mind, and we always kept in mind during the pandemic, was there was a lot of information out there. There was even a whole lot of misinformation out there. And the one thing that we approach any problem, and especially our biggest problems, is it's not us versus the council or the residents versus us or anything, but it's really all of us together against the problem. And so as we think about the pandemic and we think about the comeback, we got to think about all those challenges that we'll have ahead and how we come together to attack those challenges, not one another in it. So hopefully that helps us as we set the conversation today.
That's great. So that's the last back look. Marla, get us looking forward. Please, any opening remarks you'd like to make?
Well, first of all, Steve, thank you so much for having me on the panel. It's great to be back in a regional conversation. As you mentioned, I spent the greater part of the last decade leading a community-based community development financial institution and a member of CNHED. And so you and I worked really closely together, and I worked very closely with individuals that are on the panel as well. So it's great to be here. I think, and I also wanted to echo, it's actually easier for me to say this now that I'm at the national level, but given my purview as someone working in the region, as well as now what I can see from our members that, span all 50 states and Puerto Rico, I would say, DC was so unbelievably generous and really, really stepped up with regard to supporting residents and small businesses. I mean, we had kind of the view of the DMV area, but now that I'm sort of at a higher bird's eye view, I can also say, objectively that DC really, really came to the table and was very, very creative. My former organization worked with and is continuing to work with DemPed so closely, and just the creativity and commitment was and is something to behold. So I just want to commend John while he's on the line here. But I also just wanted to say, I think this time period has been just a time of contradictions. So, on one hand, we are physically distant from one another, yet we're all brought together with this sameness that we're all going through. And I think it's, something that we won't soon forget if and when it ever ends. At the same time, there are a lot of resources flowing. It also accelerated a lot of the disparities within the communities that we serve. So I think at the same time as it's unprecedented assistance and safety nets flowing, it certainly accelerated gentrification, certainly accelerated the racial wealth gap. And so, it's kind of the yin and yang of what's going on, in the world today. I do think it's a time period where we need to be more intentional. And I think what I would miss just from an industry point of view is that some of these organic things that happen at events when you run into someone and have a conversation, that then turns into a project. So some of those connections aren't happening. And I really, really look forward to when we turn back to that. But I'll just leave with one last thought, which is that, as federal funds continue to flow and there's, billions of dollars coming soon, I worry that within our industry, those higher capacity organizations are going to be the ones that keep standing and growing, and those lower capacity organizations either won't be positioned to absorb that type of funding or simply won't be at the table to play at all. And so, that's something as a membership organization now, like you, Stephen, as I worry about our members, that's kind of what is keeping me up at night.
Thank you, Marla. Ellis, then Andrew.
Steve, thanks again for the opportunity to be on this panel. The deputy mayor and Marla's comments ring true to me in so many ways, so I won't be duplicative. But I think this is such a really important conversation, and I just applaud you for having this focus be on the future, right? And not constantly revisiting the past or being in the present. And I'll just maybe pick up where Marla left off and would say that I think we're in the midst of the community and economic development renaissance. Because all the things that we just talked about, like as Marla said, physically distant but connected in terms of purpose, I think is a theme that is going to continue. I think we've learned that we can do some work together. We can do it virtually in some ways, and we can use technology in other ways. And I think that the future of community and economic development over the next 5 to 10 years is going to look dramatically different than it has over the last 40. CDFIs and other community-based organizations have been seen as on the periphery. I think that now they're being actually seen as in the forefront. And to Marla's point, there are more resources being marshaled in now than ever. And other players and other actors who actually see opportunity as more mainstream opportunities, whereas before they were just a kind of adjacent. And so what keeps me up at night is not wanting to be the blockbuster of the sector, thinking that we have some special sauce that can't be replicated, or people might not think can be replicated. And I think that there's opportunities for us to work collectively together. This is the moment for us to do that. Exactly to Marla's point, we have to look at ourselves and work collectively together, because what things that I, as a leader of a combined organization now that has capacity, there are things and blind spots that we can't do, right? There are adjacencies and proximities that we don't have. And collectively, if we work together, we will have that capacity. So I'm really thoughtful about how we can work together, how we can utilize technology and really think differently about the changing demographics in the country, right? As baby boomer population are getting older, and new folks are getting, are coming up through community and economic development, but also within the communities and how to engage them differently. I think we need to really take note from how people have been successful in adjacent markets and think about how they can be applicable to the work that we do.
Before Andrew, I'm going to footnote a couple things to come back around collaboration and model development. But the one thing I want to say, and I know this from my really dinosaur-like career, you cannot achieve racial equity without community economic development. There's not a formula that will achieve that. And so I'm really glad to hear you say you see a renaissance. I've been praying for a renaissance for 5 to 10 years now, having led the community economic development field in the early 90s when I was at NCCED, and seeing it wane, and seeing the problems because of its waning expand. I'm so heartened to hear that view. Andrew, come on in.
Actually, I was going to echo that as well. As you and I have talked about, Stephen, thank you again for inviting me and having me join this illustrious panel. I grew up in community and economic development. When my mom ran one of the largest housing and economic development programs in the Midwest. And I came to Washington thinking that's what I would go into. I attended one of our consortium universities. And was derailed into a career in education, as I think my parents would describe. And to echo what you said, Ellis, that the importance that it's not a silo, it's not just economic development, it's not just housing, it's not just education, but it's the intersection of those efforts that has that powerful catalytic impact that not only transforms the moment, but creates that generational wealth transition that really changes communities. This is my third time back in DC. I was here at the start of my career. I worked on the Hill for a while. I was here as a dean at George Mason University, and now to return to work with all of our regional educational institutions. I believe very deeply this should be, for all the right reasons, the world's greatest college town, the world's greatest educational community. But to echo the language that Marla and Ellis use, the thing that keeps me up at night is we still have a very low rate of attainment for our young people in our public schools. When you look at students starting in 9th grade, the chances of them attaining any kind of a credential, college credential, career credential, corporate credential, is small. And we have to change that, and we know we can change that. But we create some of our own challenges in this. I'm kept up at night by the status of our universities. We lost almost $500 million net after all of the challenges of the past year. We're in that recovery state. We are nonprofit organizations and trying to build back to the levels we need to serve the community. But at the same time, we're one of the only communities in the country where our largest scholarship programs incentivize students to go as far away as possible. We drain our own talent in many ways with the way we've designed those programs. And because we are, without touching the sore tooth, not a state, we don't have an educational system from K through 12 through higher education that has the traditional pathways that connect with industry. Now, I'll say in many states, this is a double-edged sword, because in many states, those systems that have developed over decades don't connect well with industry. So I think it presents an opportunity for us to take a leap forward. And some of this work is underway. When you look at the Amazon collaboration with George Mason, Northern Virginia Community College, and the advanced program, the Accenture effort at building apprenticeships across the city, the terrific work that Capital CoLab has done and IBM P-Tech has done with technical pathways, we see the beginnings of what it could look like to collaborate across the silos And if you start to, and Steve, you and I have talked about this, and John and I have talked about it a little bit, but if you start to grow that out, and you think about the investment in healthcare, the investment in affordable housing, and the investment in education as a collaborative effort, the potential is tremendous for the Washington area to leapfrog other areas. I believe this is the place that people ought to want to live. We got to build back that community pride. I love this city so deeply. And the idea that folks talk about that it's better to go elsewhere is baffling to me. With the Smithsonian's, the Kennedy Centers, the schools here. I'll just give one last piece that, if you talk about looking forward and things that give you hope. A couple weeks ago, I was at the Howard University of Maryland football game. It was not a great football game. All respect to my members, Howard. They got a little, kicked around the curb there. But in the middle of the game at halftime, the two marching bands, Howard University and University of Maryland's marching band, combined with one of DC's most famous go-go bands and did a combined go-go concert in celebration of the culture of our region. And it was amazing. And I don't think there's another place in the country where you could have had that incredible intersection. And so I think we've just scratched the surface of what we're capable of doing together. And so when I look forward, I do have a lot of enthusiasm for where we can go next.
And so, and I'm going to give other panelists a chance to respond to each other. But as this thing unfolded and through our community anchor partnership work, I began to surfacely appreciate the impact that this was going to have on the higher ed system. One of my thoughts was, obviously about the impact on students, but one of my other thoughts was our universities are among our largest employers of district residents. And so as I looked into the future, I'm thinking, what impact is that going to have? And literally at the same time, I was beginning to pay attention to that. CNHED was invited to serve on the DC Hospital Association's workforce partnership. And so I'm seeing maybe we're going to lose some jobs over here, but we certainly are going to expand jobs in the healthcare arena. And what does this look like? What is this command of us as leaders to help figure out these shifts and also the adaptabilities that we're going to face going forward? I don't think our health industry workforce would be preparing for permanent increases were it not for what we've experienced in this public health crisis. And so, looking down on this all, we clearly are seeing some losses. But let me just stop and see if any of you want to respond to anything that the other has said. And if not, I'll go to questions and also have a couple of notes from previous comments that have been made.
Well, I want to build on something Marla said too. Oh, Marla, please. No, please.
I was just going to say that I did not mean to project my insomnia onto everyone in the comments. So I tend to wake up at 4 a.m. every night without fail. And when I said this is what keeps me up at night, it literally does keep me up at night. But it wasn't intended to be a theme of the panel. That was all. Go ahead, John.
Well, actually, I was going to mention what keeps me up at night. So, and Marla, it's actually but it's building off of what you said, which is we've got to get back together again, right? So listen, we are doing really well as a region in terms of our vaccination of our residents, right? There's a ways to go, but we're doing really well. I won't ask anybody on the panel or anybody who's watching if there are any 65-year-old and older DC residents with us. But if you are, then the high chances that you are vaccinated, because 95% of our DC residents 65 and older are vaccinated. And listen, I think we're going to follow and see that trend over the next few weeks and months get to that level. It's going to take an effort to get there. But that being said, we've got to figure out ways to get together again. It's going to help get our economy back open. And so we've got to do that because it supports small businesses. So let's make sure that all of us, I like to say, if you're on this panel right now, or if you're watching this, and if you haven't been to your office this week, you're doing it wrong, right? You've got to get back to the office. We're all leaders here. We've got to get our people back to the office because it supports so many other businesses indirectly. So let's all commit to that. And then our advocacy together, we have to lift up our voices and really ask the federal government to make a move back into the office. So just some numbers. Before the pandemic, there were about 800,000 jobs in the District of Columbia. 197,000 of those jobs were the federal government, right? And we know that primarily those are office workers. So, when I say get back to the office, it's because office workers are the ones who, for the most part, have not come back. All of our frontline workers are back. Many district government policy workers are now back in the office. The federal government's got to get back in order for us really to have that comeback come to fruition even quicker. So we got to keep advocating for that. And really just think about it. If we all stay on these virtual convenings from here on out, everybody's going to look at us and think that we're a bunch of squares. We're not. We're vibrant, and Marla is right. All that ideation that goes on, not on the panel, but on the walk out of the room or the walk into the room, that's where we really collaborate. So we got to get back to in person.
John, I'm still going to use that squares analogy. I promise you, it's going to be in 3 speeches next week. I promise you it will. One of the themes that was brought up by actually each of you in different ways, and I'm taking a little moderator's privilege and lifting it up, is the notion of stronger collaborations. And one of the things that, as a fundraiser that I've observed is that larger national money is shifting its focus on funding to accelerating existing collaborations. And I will say in some ways the district has, I don't think we're the caboose on the train, but I don't think we're the engine pulling it either. And we've begun, CNHED has begun to try to be more intentional. We're working closely with capital impact partners through the Entrepreneurs of Color Fund. But I just look at the JP Morgan Advancing Cities. I look at the previous City Foundation grant on community impact. Even the federal government is starting to require it in new ways. The SBA Navigator grant has a mandatory minimum of 5 collaborators in the delivery of those services. And I think that what's at the base of it is a recognition that we have to facilitate systems change and that individual grantees working alone are not going to achieve that. And so I really want to pivot to you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and say, I would love an open door to talk about how we more intentionally structure some of those collaborations. We're doing it at the community level in some ways, but the city is literally the skeletal structure for a lot of what has to happen. And I would just love to see us thinking, Andrew, some of our conversations, you working with your consortium to get them to do a universal DCAP kind of MOU, something that you came up with was a wholesale approach to what would have been a more painful retail engagement. And so I wonder if others are seeing and feeling this in their work. The district does win some things nationally and even federally, but I look at, whenever I lose a grant, I pay attention to who won it. And whenever I apply for a grant, I look at who won it the 2 years before. And I can tell you with Advancing Cities, with JP Morgan, and with Citi, you cannot create collaboration for the purpose of competing. You have to be and work together in order to be seen as competitive. And I just wonder if any of you have views coming out of the pandemic and facing forward and following the city's mandate to use this moment as a way to advance racial equity. What does collaboration look like for us going forward?
Well,
If you
Steve,
don't like that question, you can reject it.
Steve, I just want I think there's a perfect example of this in the COVID testing collaboration that we were able to do, led by American University. We set up a new lab based at Gallaudet that provided 50,000 PCR saliva-based tests a week. That is now the primary testing service for the Smithsonian, but it's also the backbone of reopening DC public schools. And the way we were able to provide it to DC public schools was we secured a large grant from the Rockefeller Foundation because it was a collaboration, because we're also, by the way, supporting Baltimore City Schools with it. So it has allowed us to do more collaboratively as the universities for the city in the midst of everything else that was happening. And I think it sets a model. You're exactly right. When we talk to Bloomberg, when we talk to Gates, they are interested in seeing the intersection of organizations. And John and I both sit on the Connected DMV group that is working on how to approach some of the Build Back America Better and the other big funding that's coming in making sure that DC and the region are well positioned to not just get our share, but be leaders in collaborative use of those funds.
I'll chime in too. I mean, there isn't one grant application, one body of work that I can think of off the top of my head that we are doing by ourselves nationally, right? Prior to the pandemic, we started down the path of having a conversation with CDC Small Business Finance, and we ended up merging with them during the pandemic, right? Based on the guys that we could come together to do something that we couldn't do individually. And it was kind of back to some of you all's comments around holistic community and economic development at scale is really what's going to be able to, what's needed to really be able to do the work. But getting to scale isn't just the two organizations coming together. It's about partnership with others, right? So the deputy mayor and I were on a panel earlier today talking about Nourish DC, right? Which is with LADC, WAKEF, right? And others. And, you know, you mentioned Advancing Cities, Steve, and the Entrepreneurs of Color Fund. We're doing that with you all, LADC and WAKEF. And then part of it is really about making sure that we subscribe to the same vision of what we want in the city. And then also recognizing that each of us bring unique assets to the table that we can and should be leveraging for ourselves. So this is definitely not the time of me, it's the time of we. And I think given the amount of resources that are coming into this industry right now, it's a great time for us to invest in ourselves, invest in our infrastructure so that we can more effectively serve the community.
I'll jump in as well. I think the point that John was underscoring that I had made earlier around sort of the lack of these organic meetups and connections, I think it actually is also reflected in our organizational collaborations. And so, you know, this is my fourth panel this week. Andrew's the first person that I didn't know on one of those panels. And I'm so excited to meet somebody new and, you know, see how we might work together. And so I think for organizations like CNHED or NALCAB, where we have this purview over our membership and we sort of know what makes everyone tick, it's our role to actually make those connections for folks when they aren't going to be able to have these, you know, sort of more organic opportunities to come together. And I think it's natural, you know, it's very comfortable and easy to work with people that you know and people that you've worked with before and people who have delivered with you, you know, or for you, if they're, you know, a subgrantee or a subcontractor to your work. But I think we also have to get outside of our comfort zones and kind of just take risks and work with folks that, you know, are newer partners or, you know, kind of newer onto the scene. I think one thing that I'm really interested in pushing forward is we have a working concept around, you know, mentoring lower capacity organizations within our membership with higher capacity organizations. And we've sort of developed a pilot that has folks from opposite sides of the country because, you know, there's always the fear of you know, sort of building up your competitor. But I think, you know, the more creative we can be around, you know, using our own relationships and bringing folks together that, you know, kind of wouldn't have met otherwise. I think that's something that we need to do, and even more right now when we're just kind of isolated into these squares, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Yeah,
I think I'll also just, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Alex.
I was going to say, Steve, just one of the things I would also mention is that I talked a little bit about kind of collaboration within our sector, but I think there's a lot of collaboration outside of our sector too, and that actually was brought on over the last 18 months as well. So I agree with you, Marla, as well around Yeah, it's the same folks on the panels. But I also would say that given the last 18 to 24 months, there has been hyper focused on how we can support communities. And I think we've had more fierce conversations around the social racial justice issues, as well as the economic implications of the pandemic. And folks have been laser focused around how we can build and kind of help the recovery in an inclusive way. And so that, to me, I've seen a lot more conversations with large corporations and other folks across industries who are actually moving in the same direction. And I think we're beginning to develop some, I'll say, unusual partnerships in that way, ones that were not as apparent pre-pandemic.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Ellis. And I'll push back a little bit on John's idea that, I think we're actually have to hold two things in our head at the same time. I don't think we're ever going back to work the way it was. I don't think my office will ever be fully back, because to sit in a commute to have that time sink just doesn't make sense when we can gather our university presidents far more easily together. So online, so we want to have the opportunities to do some things in person, but we're going to continue to do things virtually. So that has, to echo what Marla said, created a challenge of how we think about community, how we think about community for students, how we think about community with our co-workers, and how we think about connections to community. But it's also presented tremendous opportunities. I've met with more CEOs directly than I think I would likely have wandering into their buildings, because folks can stack some of these virtual meetings so much more easily. But I'll add that our universities are back, John. So we're at 90+% vaccinated for most of our campuses, and a couple of them are at 99 point something percent vaccinated, and they're demonstrating that it works. That they're there, they're in person, staff are back on campus, and they're having events. So we can do these things. We need to add. And I'm hopeful with what the administration is doing right now, a much bolder layer of testing to that vaccination as well.
And Andrew, I agree with you too. I think we're going to take a lot of good things that we realize how to work more efficiently. And I don't want anybody to commute for commute's sake, trust me. But especially even the environmental and sustainability reasons for that. But I do think we have to do a little bit more in person. And the universities are actually a great example. We can do it safely with the right protocols in place, really a strong emphasis on vaccination. It could happen safely. And what we don't want to do is sideline that ideation that goes on, and also just the human connection. Listen, the pandemic shouldn't change us in ways that makes us less empathetic to one another. Right. And it's hard to do that if you're not in person. Just thinking of earlier today, I was with a team member who, was just having a bad day. I probably wouldn't have known that if we weren't in person. Right. And I can't support her if I don't know that. And I wouldn't have caught it on a Zoom. I just wouldn't have. And so we've got to keep looking out for each other. And the way that we do that is getting back in person more. I don't know that we'll be back in person 5 days a week. Actually, for District of Columbia government, those who are sort of in policy positions, as I'll call them, office workers, we're on a 3 and 2 model. 3 days in the office, 2 days where you're teleworking. And so that's something I think we do have to obviously evolve, but our comeback is really going to get slowed if we don't come back to the office.
So I'll add a little levity to you're on a 3 and 2 model. I'm on a 3 and done model. I have some employees who've told me they're never coming back because of their 15-minute commute. And my deal with them is if your phone goes unanswered 3 times, we're done and you're back. But on a serious note, John, I really do hear what you're saying about the importance of having a downtown robust existence. I just I'm getting ready to sign a 5-year lease extension on our space. I'm still figuring out what remote existence looks like, but I'm going to maintain, our property and our office down there. Right after my first vaccination, I wondered about a lot of the businesses that I normally patronize downtown. So I went downtown one day and I just walked in and talked to the business owners that I know. And I got a great sense of their pain, and their pain was all around. They had gotten their PPP. They were working out things with their landlords on rent abatement or delay. They missed their customers. And it was really clear that that was the vein of their existence. And they projected both uncertainty and fear about whether it would ever be the same. I generally say that the win is in the middle on most things, and I think that it might be here. I'm wondering if there are going to be different industries that emerge because we do make a partial permanent shift from the way that we've done. And John, you may have some insights around that.
I was going to say there's one company I'm really excited about, a DC-based company called WorkChew. WorkChew, what they do is they provide co-working space, but at venues kind of across the district. So they take like a restaurant, they'll actually reserve space so people can do their co-working, get out of the house a little bit, and be able to do their co-working. So if you thought of WeWork and you thought of it at your local restaurant or even at a hotel, you're actually able to reserve a space that is yours, hence WorkChew. They're actually now expanding to cities all over the country. So excited about that. And I see a question too in the chat about kind of, beyond the federal government, what do we have to think about? And actually, that was something we were thinking about pre-pandemic. Mayor Bowser says all the time, we're not just a government town. There's so much more to it. And I like to talk about three sectors that really stand out. Obviously the feds, the eds, I know Andrew will like that one, and the meds, right? So those three industries with hospitality and technology obviously overlaying all of it, but those three industries I think are real opportunities for us. The feds, believe it or not, they're going to be here. We've got to pivot back to one of our strong suits, which is that the federal government is here in the district. That attracts businesses here. We got to not step away from that. The eds, Andrew's going to tell you all about how many people they employ, but really keeping young people here. So they attract young people, but they also attract other companies to come. DC is known for having one of the best highly educated workforces in the country. And a lot of that is because of the work that Andrew and his members do to make sure they have an excellent experience here. And then the meds. If you think about all the medical institutions that really are here, including Children's, which is doing some really great work. I'm really excited. I got a chance to go up to their Walter Reed Innovation and Research Campus. If you haven't been there, you've got to check it out because they have a new J Labs with Johnson & Johnson. And so those innovations that are going to happen in medicine, especially for children, are going to happen right here in Washington, D.C. So I'm really optimistic about what we have. And I know Andrew's going to want to jump in even more on what the eds are doing.
Well, I'll echo John that those three sectors are great, but I also think that the intersection of those allows us to be at the leading edge of, we are one of the world centers for pandemic response. We just are, and leveraging that with our companies and with attraction of economic development and is critical. We are the centers in the world for cybersecurity, not only what we do on our campuses and in our business, but the National Intelligence University and the intelligence sector. We are increasingly the world center for quantum computing, the world center for thinking about alternative energy, the world center, and I'll add one of my pet issues that I really want us to think about being known as, we are one of the world centers for the arts, especially for decolonization of the arts, for thinking bold. I mean, when you look at Lonnie Bunch's leadership at the Smithsonian and the incredible advancement that the Smithsonian has done with our community, where this Kennedy Center has gone, where the arts at our universities have gone. We now have the Chadwick Boseman School of the Arts at Howard. I mean, this is an incredible moment for DC in stepping onto the world stage, and not with something new, but with what we've been able to do distinctly compared to other areas. And I think we've at times been a little bit self-defacing about being a one-horse town, about being a fed town. And actually, we have some things that no place else in the world does. That it's the reason that HQ2 ended up here from Amazon. We are a big attractor. So I think John's right. We need to leverage those things and think boldly. And at the same time, with each one of those steps, I'll toss over to Marla or Ellis on this, but that has to be done with an equity lens. When we're bringing in new organizations, when we're driving these new sectors, and I know I think I'm fortunate to serve this incredible group of presidents who thinks about this every day. But how do we move forward, but do that in a way that maximizes equitable opportunity, that changes generational wealth, that transforms opportunity in our community? So Ellis, if you'll solve that next, that'd be great.
Marla, you look like you were getting ready to jump in a second ago.
No, I was just thinking, as Andrew was saying, that just around how industry engages on that front, you know, with regard to the equity lens. And
Marla, we're getting some really strange vibrations, not from you, but from your computer.
I'm not sure what's going on. Is this any better? Okay, I'll just pause and then I'll come back.
Okay.
And Marla, I appreciate you doing that to prove my point that we've got to be back in person.
I knew John was going to jump on that. John, did you text Marla and tell Marla to tweak her speaker? So you all are getting through, you've got, what are some of the challenges ahead? I'm just wondering, and you've touched on it a little, are there any other bright spots that are worth lifting up about where we're going? John, you hinted at some plans that the mayor has. I think that the city and all of its stakeholders and partners have been kind of leaning their shoulder in around racial equity and disparity elimination and so forth. Certainly everybody else on this phone is doing work related, and everyone else on this in this meeting is doing work related and committed to that. But are there other bright spots that you all see that maybe those of us who are really buried in the trenches may not see or may not be aware of or may be missing?
Well, so I promise I won't just stick on Andrew's sector, but there is a lot going on with our home institutions or home universities that we're really excited about. GW, we're actually partnering with them, talked about collaborations, partnerships to create an innovation district to not just highlight the great work that happens at GW, but also to help the Golden Triangle bid reimagine kind of the office space that is in the west part of downtown. So that's a good collaboration. Also, Howard University is now going to be embarking on bringing what they call the National Centers for Health Disparities onto the portion of their campus. If you're going up Georgia Avenue heading north and you know where the McDonald's is, that huge lot there is going to be transformed into the National Centers for Health Disparities. Really important that we highlight that work. Georgetown University is looking at its assets on the east end of downtown to create really like their capital campus, where they will have the law center, the continuing studies building, the new residential that they're building. So there is a lot that's happening that I think we are excited about. Actually, Catholic University, my alma mater, is expanding. They're going to double the size of their nursing school. Talk about a industry where we need more workers. We need to invest, and what they were excited about was not just that they have a donor who's helping them expand the physical space, but they also have now funding that Mayor Bowser's put in the Fair Shot budget to make sure that we help people reskill into those high growth industries. And so they're going to make sure that they are ready to take advantage of that. So I think there are many bright spots that folks should look at. One thing I'll put a plug in for is to make sure that people check out obviously dc.com. We've laid out some of the programs, incentives, including what Ellis and I are working on with Nourish DC on that website. So you can kind of see the menu of different incentives and programs that we have.
I actually saw an announcement or some type of promo come out this morning on it. So since we went back to collaborations, I'm going to lift up a point that I live in, and I may just not be bright enough to catch it, but for me, how we develop collaborations is begging a deeper look for me. One of my beliefs is that everything in life is art and science. What I typically know is that people of color and community folks are generally heavy on the art, sometimes a little light on the science. And so how do we blend what I know are at least those two forces in how we structure and create collaboration? Sometimes it's organically, sometimes it's funder driven, sometimes it's governmental. But you know, I mentioned before that before I apply for a grant, I look at see who wins it. And oddly enough, I don't care which funder I'm looking at, there are two cities that pop up every time. One is Seattle, Washington, and the other is Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you look back over, and there's something, and I'm trying to get in there and try to learn what it is, they're very intentional about their collaborative structures, partners, relationships, and framing. And they're winning time after time after time. And I don't think the foundation's presidents necessarily went to the University of Washington or the University of Minnesota, but I think it's something in the work. And I'm just wondering, and I say this to you all as leaders, is there some work to be done around creating a stronger scientific framework for how we foster collaborations here in this region? Is there a role for government in putting us in the room, John, and telling us to tuck our egos, you know, leave our egos at the door, and here's how we're going to work together? Ellis, you're an intermediary. Andrew, you're a consortium leader. I think we at the community could use some help and support around figuring out where we drop our hat, if you will, and say, this is the work we're going to do. This is our role. This is who we're going to partner with and how. Andrew, you're biting at the chomp.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt your flow, Steve, but I think DC has been unusual compared to other cities where I've worked and advised in how siloed we tend to be. And maybe some of it's just the weird way we're set up as a city state. Maybe some of it's the way our sectors developed. But we very often will set up 10 different nonprofits to do the same work that don't talk to each other and won't bring in the other sectors as we talk about things. So, you know, I think one of the pieces that we have to be very intentional about is when we're working, you know, somebody posted and by the way, thank you, Sylvester, for mentioning the Hopkins Public Policy School as part of our consortium as well. But the question of affordable housing, that is one of our largest challenges in every region, but particularly here. I'm amazed that we haven't brought the universities often into the discussion of affordable housing. And when we started having those discussions, we started thinking really creatively, what might that look like? What would that collaboration be? When we start talking about food access, we often haven't brought in some of the other organizations, the businesses that could be helpful, and those that have huge within their industries, within our universities, within our industry buildings. We have huge food deployment sectors that can then be helpful with doing other work. So I think, you know, just being more outside of the box of our little worlds where we end up can be incredibly helpful, but we have to be really intentional about that. I do think we have under John and Mayor Bowser's leadership, folks like you, Marla and Ellis and Steve, but also I mentioned Lonnie Bunch and some of the folks in the athletic sector. When at the beginning of the pandemic, when we started thinking about how to do things, I was calling folks at Monumental Sports to find out what they were doing, because they had a huge deployment thinking about how they would bring folks back that looked a lot like some of the things we were thinking about. So I was on for the past couple of days with Amazon talking about their new deployment models for healthcare. This idea that we have to solve each thing under our own sector is something that we can break past, and I think actually get beyond success of what other cities have been able to do.
I really appreciate that comment, and that is one of my kind of forward hopes. I think we are doing more and doing better, but I would love to see it strengthened and more formalized. I'd like to see those silos come down. Like, the challenges are too big for any of us to try to take on by ourselves. Ellis or Marla, do you have anything to throw into that?
How am I sounding? Is this any better? Or is it still bad? No. Oh gosh, I don't know what it is.
Why don't you sign out and sign back in?
Okay, I will.
I'm almost certain that will make a difference.
Thanks.
All right.
So I was going to
Ellis,
say really quickly, I think another bright spot, and it gets to the point around collaboration, and I think you're getting pulled into this too, is the Greater Washington Partnership started a few years ago. There is some work that's happening there that's really kind of focused on inclusive growth. I think I've been in more conversations with a broad cast of characters who really are trying to advance the work. And I think there's some bright spots around what that might lead to, both directly through the partnership, but also indirectly, right, outside of the room, to the Deputy Mayor's point. I think that there's a lot of relationships that are beginning to connect the community and economic development sector more broadly with where the trends are going, where the investments are going to be made in eds and meds in particular, and thinking about how we might be able to support workforce development and other things such as affordable housing, et cetera, which again, it's still rather nascent, but I think it's a number of positive steps moving forward.
Marla, let's test you out. How you sounding?
All right, you tell me.
Yay.
Okay, good. No, I was just going to say something around this idea of collaboration. I think, from my time in DC, if I could make a recommendation, having, someone from DC government on the line, is there really is a need to build the capacity of newer and smaller organizations. It's no coincidence that the same organizations end up getting the most funding or are called to be on, all kinds of bids. And, I remember when I was leading a committee at CNHED, we really struggled because the range of capacity of the organizations was so broad that it was challenging even just to have a meeting that would be relevant for everyone, because you had groups that were sort of established and had been doing the work for 20 years plus, 30 years, 40 years, and then newer groups who really wanted to serve maybe a particular community in DC or a particular neighborhood. And what was stopping them was just, the lack of experience, the lack of capacity, the lack of resources. And, if I could put a program out there as sort of a model, the SBA has a program for government contractors that's called the Mentor Protege Program. And basically, if you're applying for a bid, you get extra points if you're bringing along a smaller subcontractor on your bid. And so what ends up happening is that subcontractor shadows the larger organization and learns basically how to deliver on a contract. And so, I really think something like that is missing in DC. It's just the range. There's nothing in the middle, and there are sort of these really high performing organizations on one end and then these smaller struggling organizations on the other hand. And I think we would be served very well by building the capacity and just creating a real ecosystem rather than having, kind of this, again, very disparate situation that mirrors actually the communities within the city.
John, there was a question in the chat around affordable housing, and I know that's center cut for the mayor and your administration. We'd love any offerings you may have on that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't be prouder of how Mayor Bowser is focused on this issue and really sees it as one that really kind of changes the trajectory of the city. I think when we took office, we knew that this was going to be something that we were going to focus on. The mayor started by saying she would commit $100 million to the Housing Production Trust Fund each and every year. That now seems like it's just a matter of course. But when you think about it, she was taking a program that was a $50 million program because it would change each year based on the revenue stream that it had. But she said we would do $100 million. And now, actually, as you know, Stephen and your members, I know, are keenly aware of this, that we've made that now a $400 million commitment for this next round. And what it means is that we really see that we can produce more housing. If we don't, we turn what is a housing pressure into a housing crisis. And you see it in cities that stopped producing housing or limited their zoning in a way that housing couldn't be produced, that it just drove up the cost of housing to levels that weren't. And I know there's a particular focus right now that we want to make sure that we are clear about is making affordable housing that actually meets the lowest levels of affordability. It's something that's been a priority for the mayor. That's why in this budget, we actually have the local rent supplement in order to match the affordable housing that we can produce. So when we go out and we ask the community what their proposals are, and that's been a challenge before, is to hit those lowest AMIs, we now have the subsidy to support the operation of those units as well. So that will allow us to create more. And one thing that we're projecting, which is pretty amazing when you think about it, with the 400 million, will actually create more 0 to 30% AMI units in this coming year. We'll invest in those and to a level that is greater than the whole Housing Production Trust Fund was on the year the mayor took office. So think about that. We'll produce that many more units than we were when we started. And it has an impact. So Howard University did a study for the CFO's office. It found that the production that happened in the first years of the Bowser administration meant that rents stayed 5.8% lower than they would have been without that production. And if we hit the 36,000 by 2025 goal, it will again keep rents 5.3% lower. That means a lot for our families, and it's why we're going to stay committed to producing and preserving affordable housing.
One thing I did want to mention, Mr. Deputy Mayor, is that I'm really proud of the fact that one of our DCAP businesses helped to produce the facility at Walter Reed that you mentioned with Children's National Hospital. They are one of the DCAP partners, and we're involved with some of the work up there. So we're winding down. We have some more time. Is there anything? I mean, I have one more question, which is, and you all have touched on it, but I'm going to ask it in the kind of a tilted fashion that I wrote it, which is, what's one thing that you see that you think maybe nobody is anticipating? We're all looking into the future with hope. We all hope that we will have, what we knew was our way of life before. I think we're beginning to anticipate that life may be different and better. But I'm just wondering if there's any one thing that you would have to offer that you think people may not be expecting about how we fully recover and how we are even better as a result of the disruption that all of this has resulted in. And if that's not a good question, come up with a better one.
I want to hear from Marla first. She's back with us. So Marla, come on, lead us here.
Well, I struggled with this question because I wasn't sure that I had anything that would be sort of outside of what anyone could think of. But I think, something that I hope is an outcome of this is that we all have more agency over our lives. And that's, just with regard to freedom in every sense, freedom of where we work, where we live, how we work. You know, I feel like an employee could come to me and say, you know, they want to be in Paris for the next 2 weeks and work from there. And I honestly would not have a problem with it. And I think that's just a new sort of openness that has come with this. And I do hope that that continues. I mean, I actually like wouldn't have gotten this job if it weren't for the pandemic, because most of my team is in San Antonio, Texas. But like now it's kind of like, okay, well, we know how to work that way, so we can make it work. So yeah, I mean, I think just, I hope this is kind of like the beginning of breaking us open to a new way of living where we have just a lot more freedom, period. Hope that was sufficiently enlightening.
No, so I thought you were going to say, Marla, you know, this has led you to conclude that your kids definitely will go away to college because, you know, because I know I feel that way about my grandkids. They live nearby, and I've seen them more than the grandparent plan was written to intend.
Yes, yes. Well, my oldest is due to go next fall. So I'm hoping that that comes to fruition. And I will say, you know, one of the questions that we had entertained was sort of what do you hope stays, and or like what did you enjoy about the pandemic that you wish would stay? Like, you know, with all of my complaints about homeschooling, you know, I can honestly say, and also just because I kind of overworked myself before the pandemic, not that I didn't as we went into the pandemic, but it was from a different setting. Like I definitely saw my children and interacted with them more during this time than probably like the 5 years previous combined, which is really sad, to be honest. And so, you know, I think it's just awesome to me to be able to be working and like have my kids come home from school and just even to say hello. It's just a different world. And I really am grateful for that. I think it opens up a lot of possibilities for working parents in general.
Well, Marla, after 3 decades of either leading or overseeing college admissions, if you want to talk in the next year, Steve can get you my contact, and we can make sure we follow up.
I will be calling.
You know, I'll echo something John said that I think we might have touched on, but the massive impact of the hospitality industry on the Washington area and the potential of us, you know, when you look at the investment that Marriott Foundation just made at Howard, as to be a center of the future of the hospitality industry in thinking boldly about it, I think is really exciting. And I think that intersects with a mention about the arts and being a center of culture in the arts. We are a center of culture in the arts. We don't talk about ourselves that way, I think, nearly enough and with enough excitement. So I think those are 2 things that we tend to overlook. And I think if I was looking forward, I think we will be a national model for student achievement and workforce development. We'll leapfrog other regions because we've got so many under credentialed individuals ready for the opportunities that are being presented here, and our workforce needs it. So lifting those individuals up in our community is in everyone's mutual interest.
I agree with both points, and just have to echo Marla's comment around being a parent. We've talked about this before, and seeing our kids much more during the last 18 months. I think that we've talked a lot about collaboration. We've talked a lot about working to make this city and the region prosper. And the thing that's top of mind for me being an intermediary is how can we make this virtuous cycle? How can we continue to make sure that as we understand the gaps that are existing in the market, how can we make sure that there are investment opportunities for people to chip in and invest in those same things? So leveraging eds and meds, et cetera. We've talked a lot about how there's a lot of resources sitting on the sidelines. They just don't know where to go to invest. And my organization is kind of putting some things in motion later this year, early next year, to really create opportunities for folks like Andrew and others, right, to find ways to invest in the community in which you're in that actually help your business and help your model. And so thinking about ways for us to do that at scale in partnership with others, I think is really what is the next chapter to the work that we're going to do together. And I think this region in particular, because we do work all across the country, is really well positioned to kind of take the mantle and be a model, to Andrew's point.
Well, I think one thing we can do as a government is figure out ways that we can collaborate and innovate the same way we did during the pandemic. So Marla mentioned it when we had $155 million in business support that we pulled out of the reserves, and we, really advocated for the federal government to give us our fair share of federal funding. How do we implement a $155 million program by ourselves? We couldn't, right? So we reached out to partners like Marla to help us to actually implement programs. And we also, in some ways, kind of stayed out of the way. When you think about the Streeteries program, as an example, that is a program that if there was not a pandemic, there would not be a Streetery program like we see it today. And I say that not, obviously, we needed outdoor dining option, but we had so much collaboration. I remember when we were starting the program, we actually said, well, we'll have to go to the ANCs first. And we actually heard from ANC commissions that they actually didn't want the restaurant owners to come before them because they would only add time to the process, right? And so I think we've got to figure out how government innovates and kind of sometimes stays out of the way, and other times that like we convene and find ways to push the community together, forward together. And I think that the pandemic actually offered an opportunity for us to do that, but it doesn't mean even when we get past the pandemic that we can't do that as well and continue to do that. So I think sometimes we've got to just look at our challenges and come together, to your point, Stephen, and just collaborate in order to find the solutions, because we've got the solutions. We just have to trust one another enough that we're all doing it to advance one another's interests. And I think we can be successful when we do that.
Couple of quick housekeeping, and then I have my own offering, but there are comments in the chat, and some of them are comments that require more informational follow-up. I don't want to kind of drag us down into that, but CNHED team, could you make sure we capture them, and we will follow up with the respondents or the people who requested either more information or qualifications. You know, when this started, I never imagined that we would be so functional as a society in quarantine. I remember at the very beginning, and I thought, you know, CNHED, we're conveners. We have working groups every week. We have monthly meetings every week. We have strategy sessions that we facilitate, and we did it all in person. And I remember at the beginning saying, oh, we're doomed. I mean, it was not but a fleeting thought, because of course, you know, you got to make it happen. And I'm just amazed at how we pivoted, how we adapted, and how we're and how we function at a level I just didn't imagine. And one of the things that it's doing for me that I'm trying to allow it to do is to more permanently take us to a place where we don't live in our assumptions about how we work, how we produce, and how we affect. And I'm wondering, what else is there that we should be doing differently to become more effective? Because I would have told you at the onset, I would have bet 2 paychecks that we would struggle to be relevant as an organization. And frankly, our relevancy heightened. We pre-vetted mask, gown, and glove companies for local hospitals, knowing their supply chain was going to be disrupted. We attached caterers to universities and hospitals, knowing their supply chains. We found our way to relevancy. And one of my takeaways is there is always a path for relevancy, no matter what the conditions we face are. And I see that in you all who are here on this panel, and I see that in the district as a whole. So one of my takeaways going forward is there's always a way to be relevant, and make no assumptions about what's the best way to get things done. We are right it in. I'm going to ask each of the panelists if they'd like to make a closing statement. I want to thank them for doing this. This is exactly what we had hoped for. We wanted to kind of pull our heads out of the sand. We wanted to look forward. We wanted a dose of optimism. We wanted a dose of insight. And each of you have not exceeded my expectations because I knew you could and would, but it's what I think the field kind of needed this look in this view. So thank you to each of you. I would love each of you to make a closing statement if you so choose. Mr. Deputy Mayor, any last words of wisdom?
I would just say that I think that you're right. There are ways that we found to work together that I think, again, we will be able to take on whatever comes our way. Again, if you told us we'd have to deal with, a pandemic, civil unrest, and a president who didn't have our best interests in mind, I would tell you, you were crazy, but it all came upon us at the same time. And that obviously led to the economic downturn that we saw too. I think one thing that I just want to caution too is that as we think about sort of coming out of the pandemic, we got to make sure that even though things look like they're coming back on the surface, we really do got to think about kind of those underlying issues and kind of the inequities that existed before have been exacerbated by the pandemic. We've got to, so all the new investment that we see in addressing the issues that plagued us before the pandemic, we've got to double down on them. So we've got a charge to keep to try to do that. I know the work that we're doing with Ellis on Nourish DC actually allows us to, one, create food access points in neighborhoods that are underserved. And then it also allows us to create entrepreneurs and support them to hire their neighbors. So we've got to find ways to keep looking at how we do have a lot of the answers if we look to one another. And so I'm really optimistic about the future. And I think we've just got to make sure that we don't see a restaurant crowded and think that we've gotten back to normal. We've got to make sure that we're really looking deep within to unearth those inequities that existed before and how we really take them head on coming out of this. So, but I'm optimistic that we have the people, the policies, and now even the funding to address it.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Marla, Ellis, and then Andrew. And by the way, after we finish, we're going to go right into the award of the Bob Pohlman Lifetime Achievement Award. So please stay on, panelists. You, of course, are welcome to stay. You can darken your camera if you like, or stay live with us as we do that brief presentation. Marla, please.
Yeah, I don't have, much to close out with other than that. I just hope that we really take the opportunity to use this as an expansive experience rather than something that breaks us for the worse. And, as a follow-up, I don't know if you've monitored the chat, but basically someone, asked that this same group come together periodically over time. And of course, John inserted that it should be in person. But which we've agreed to. So, that's something that I look forward to. I think it actually ended up exceeding my personal expectations with regard to just, having a conversation with, folks that I like and that I'm happy to meet today. And, I just appreciate being able to have been a part of it. So thank you.
Ellis?
I would just say, Steve, thanks for the invitation. Again, this has been a great conversation today. And my biggest takeaway is the deputy mayor has jokes. So this is funny. So I can't wait to the in-person conversation. But no, I think this is something that has been really, again, I said top of mind. I think we are going through this renaissance period. And I think it's an opportunity for us to learn and think about how we can take the next step in ways that are meaningful and substantive relative to the past. Marla talked about the way that we work has dramatically changed, and we should think about that as well. And as an intermediary, my goal is always to develop the most tools that I can, bring the toolbox, the most broadest toolbox that I can, and have that to be informed by information and data. So as we've been talking about eds and meds, like the research that Andrew and his constituency should be bringing to bear, should be informing the work that I should be doing in the city, right? And so I look forward to having opportunities to engage, to learn, and to figure out how we can utilize our capital, both social and financial, to be able to support the work of this region. So again, really appreciate the opportunity to be on this call and look forward to the follow-up.
Well, spoken like a consortium Georgetown grad, Ellis, and I Googled all of you beforehand, so I know, Marla went to Johns Hopkins, and John, of course, has already plugged Catholic, which, by the way, I have a pennant right over my shoulder here waiting for you, John. So we'll so that your background can have a little CU pride as well. I agree entirely. I hope we never go back to normal. Whatever that meant, it meant increasing inequity. It meant lack of communal pride. I hope we're coming back to something bolder and better. It's been such a pleasure. I will say, as this is my third decade living in DC, but having lived in other locations in between, this is the most functional I've seen the community. And I know that at times it can feel that we're still at loggerheads between the mayor's office and the council, between the council and the business community. I actually have found the discussions incredibly energizing, the collaborations bolder than I've ever seen, the willingness to sit down at the table and talk about how we can work together more open than I've ever seen it before. I think we've got some of our most visionary leaders that we've ever had. And I think it presents us with a range of opportunities that we can't afford to miss. We need to leverage this moment to make sure the most vulnerable members of our community gain access to the opportunities that other parts of our community just routinely expect. And I think it'll be a transformative moment. I'm very excited to get to be in. And I agree, we should have this panel. Again, we should do it in person, perhaps over drinks, and perhaps at one of our campuses. Well, if we do it on campus, it'll be a little harder to do over drinks, but we'll work it out.
I'll host the first next meeting at Joe's Steak and Seafood in the heart of downtown. But Andrew, I think that point is really good, and we're going to close out and thank the panel and switch over to the award. I agree, and I love the way you framed it. The vulnerability of the moment made us relate to each other differently. And yet we've been vulnerable to other things all along. And if we treat those all along vulnerabilities the way we treated the public health crisis, we would be operating at a higher level with higher connectivity and so forth. And so I had a similar conversation with someone and said, they said, we were in other pandemics before this came along. They were the pandemics of inequity and disparity and so forth, but we weren't acting like we were in a pandemic. And if we model our behavior as we face those lesser named pandemics, we would actually sustain some of the efficiencies and the effectiveness. So maybe that's our kind of mantra going forward. This pandemic may be handled, but we still have other ones that we were facing before. We should face them the same way. So let me thank the panel. Mr. Deputy Mayor, thank you for taking time and being with us. Marla, always good to see you. So good to bring you back home to your roots. Andrew, we love the relationship and the support. We've been able to instantly connect with you. And Ellis, our budding relationship through the work our teams are doing together, I just have really high hopes for where it's going to ultimately take it. Thanks to each of you for being with us today. And with that, I'm going to ask our board chairman, Phil Heck, to turn on his computer. And Phil, take us through the presentation of the Bob Pohlman Award.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you very much to all of the panelists for presenting a very lively and optimistic view of the future. I think it's only appropriate that when we're looking to the future, we also remember the past. So in that context, I'm very pleased to present this year's Bob Pohlman Lifetime Achievement in Community Development Award. Bob Pohlman served as CNHED's executive director from 2000 to 2014. And he was a beloved figure in the community development field, as well as a great mentor, friend, and colleague. Bob's work at CNHED followed a 23-year career in the District of Columbia government, where he served as director of the Department of Housing and Community Development, Deputy Mayor for Finance, and Chief Financial Officer. His first post with the DC government was with the Model Cities program as fiscal monitor, and then as budget and accounting officer. Bob's career embodied a true commitment to public service. Bob passed away in 2018, leaving an enormous legacy. In considering ways to honor Bob, CNHED's Board of Directors established an annual award that is given to the community development leader whose achievements reflect his values and his work. The CNHED board has set 3 criteria for the award: at least 20 years of consecutive service in the fields of housing, community, and economic development, a demonstrated commitment to community development and public service in the spirit of Bob Pohlman and in alignment with the mission of CNHED. And third, notable achievements in the District of Columbia. This year, the CNHED board is happy to have selected Olive Idaheen to receive the Bob Pohlman Lifetime Achievement in Community Development Award. Olive has worked consistently in the community development field through all of her career over the past 25 years. In fact, she served as CNHED's first executive director from 1994 to 1999. In that role, Olive grew the organization from an all-volunteer operation to an effective organization, representing the interests of nonprofit housing developers in policy and budget matters in the District of Columbia. She also provided leadership in combining 2 distinct alliances, the Coalition of Nonprofit Housing Developers and the Coalition of Economic Development Organizations. The combined entity, CNHED, more comprehensively addresses the community economic development that is so required in DC. Olive's final act as executive director was actually to hire Bob Pohlman as her successor. So I think we're coming full circle. Following her time at CNHED, Olive held several key finance and banking positions. She was senior director at Fannie Mae Foundation and CRA representative at the Bank of America and at E-Trade. She now has her own private consulting firm, CalIve, Inc., which focuses on community economic development. Today, in her role as the private consultant and as a CNHED board member, Olive continues to demonstrate her commitment to community development and to build on her long track record of contributions to making the District of Columbia a better place to live and work. Congratulations, Olive.
Oh, thank you, Phil. I am so honored. So it was so funny. I think about 2 days ago, Phil called me and he starts up by saying, "You missed a board meeting." And I was in a panic, like, oh my gosh, it wasn't on my calendar. How could I have missed that? And he said, just kidding, that there was a vote and I was going to be receiving this award. So I am really humbled. And thank you, everyone. Thank you for those that nominated me. Thank you for those that voted. And I do accept the award very graciously. And like you said, Phil, we've come full circle, so I very much believe that we need to know where we're coming from so we know where we're going, right? So the panel before us was very, very informative, but the word that kept jumping out in my head was collaboration. And that is what we tried to do when the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing was first founded. So Phil, you are right. There was the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and there was a Coalition for the Coalition for Economic Development. And those 2 organizations collaborated and came together because we realized at that time that we were, fighting against each other, right? Because we're all in the same community economic development space and advocating, truly against each other, before the City Council and the Department of Housing. So it is so heartwarming to see how far we have come. And I'd like to say that my biggest achievement was hiring Bob Pohlman. So he came after me. And the thing that I particularly remember was he was coming out of retirement at that time. he had a deep, so you've read out his resume. He truly had a deep knowledge of how the district government worked, the budgeting system, policy issues, the city council. So I take ownership of that. I accept, I'm so proud that I was able to bring Bob Pohlman on, so thank you, everyone. And again, I am truly humbled by this, by the recognition. And as everyone, those of you that know me well, this is a passion of mine. And even though I've set up my own consulting practice right now, I'm still head deep in community development work. And in fact, several of you are my clients now. So I will pause then. Thank you again.
Back over to you, Steve.
So congratulations, Olive. So excited for you. People, I have a different connection with Olive. I jokingly say Olive has funded me at 4 organizations through 3 of her different jobs, going back to her job at Fannie Mae, and I have watched her support and nurture the field. One thing that I will just lift up personally about Olive is Olive has been a behind the scenes advocate and salesperson for the field broadly. I happen to know that there are influencers and decision makers who are often looking at making changes in the priorities of their foundation, in the priorities of their corporation, in the priorities of their bank. And they always check in with Olive. And Olive always says, don't you dare. And they don't. And the field has been broadly supported for decades because of Olive's somewhat invisible but extremely effective advocacy. So I'm very happy for you. Phil, thanks for making time to present the Bob Pohlman Award. We wanted to continue to grow in its presence, in its stature, and we certainly took a big step forward today. Thank all of you for coming out for the panel. I hope you found it to be nurturing and informative and hope infusing. I certainly did. Just listening to them give us things to anticipate and to look forward to and to hold on to. So again, thanks for supporting Community Development Week. I want to thank the CNHED staff who works tirelessly behind the scenes. A particular thanks to Hallie Holmes and Rena Whitted and Yvette Banfield and Lindsay and the rest of the team in making this year's Community Development Week what it has been. Thank you all. Have a great evening.